She stood alone at the edge of the grand ballroom, the champagne flute growing warm in her fingers. The music swelled, the candlelight flickered across 100 jeweled throats, and every whispered conversation seemed to brush against her name. But no one spoke to her. No one approached. Her husband, Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Thornfield, was dancing with Lady Celia Pemberton for the second time that evening, his hand resting at the small of the woman's back as if it belonged there. He was smiling. He never smiled at his wife. Evelina, Duchess of Thornfield, watched the scene as though it were a play she had already seen too many times. She felt the curious stares of the other guests, the pity hidden behind polite fans, the unspoken question, why does he ignore her so completely? She had asked herself the same question for 3 long years. Tonight, the answer finally settled into her bones, cold and quiet. She was nothing to him. She had never been anything but a transaction, a burden he had been forced to carry. And she was exhausted from loving a man who looked straight through her. When the dance ended, Alexander bowed to Lady Celia, then turned and saw his wife. For a fleeting moment his gaze met hers. She saw nothing there. No greeting, no acknowledgement. He simply turned his back and walked toward the card room, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowd. Something inside Evelina cracked, a hairline fracture that spread with each beat of her heart. She set down the untouched champagne and walked out of the ballroom alone, her silk slippers silent on the marble floor. No one tried to stop her. She had become a ghost in her own life. That night, sitting before the mirror in her separate bedchamber, Evelina removed her pearls and looked at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. 3 years ago, she had arrived at Thornfield Hall with trembling hope. She had known the marriage was not a love match. It was an arrangement born of desperation and duty. Her father, a baron of modest means, had fallen into crippling debt after a series of unlucky investments. Debtor's prison loomed, and the scandal would have destroyed her younger sister's chances of a decent marriage. Then had come an unexpected lifeline. The Duke of Thornfield's solicitor appeared with a contract. In exchange for her hand, all her father's debts would be cleared and a generous settlement provided. The Duke himself remained a distant figure, signing papers without ever meeting her. Evelina had cried the night she agreed, but she had also prayed. Perhaps, she thought, if she could be a good wife, patient and kind, love might grow. She had arrived at Thornfield Hall on a gray autumn morning, her heart full of resolutions. Alexander Blackwood had met her in the great hall, tall and impossibly handsome, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter storms. He had bowed correctly, spoken the necessary words, and then retreated behind a wall of icy courtesy. No warmth, no curiosity, just duty. The wedding had been a quiet affair, and the wedding night never happened. He had simply shown her to her own suite of rooms and bid her good night. Every attempt she made in those first months to bridge the distance was met with polite indifference. She arranged his favorite flowers in the library. He never noticed. She learned the names of all his tenants. He dismissed it as unnecessary effort. She wore the colors he once mentioned he liked. He never glanced at her gown. She stood beside him at every tedious social event, silent and invisible, while he charmed others with rare smiles she never received. The breaking point had come in the middle of their second year. One cold February evening, Evelina had been walking toward his study to bring him a letter that had been misdelivered. The door was ajar, and she heard the low rumble of his voice along with that of his closest friend, Lord William Sterling. She paused, not intending to eavesdrop, but then her own name floated through the gap. "Evelina," William said. "She's a quiet little thing. You could at least pretend to tolerate her." Alexander's laugh was a blade. "Tolerate her? Sterling, I cannot forget that she and her father schemed to trap me into this marriage. She is no different from every other fortune hunter who circled me after I inherited. She stays because she has nowhere else to go. I endure her presence because I must, but I will never give her my heart. She is a burden, and she always will be." Evelina had stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hand. She had never schemed for anything. She had only sacrificed herself to save her family. His words branded her, each syllable a glowing iron. She did not confront him. She simply turned away, walked back to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed until dawn. The hope that had flickered within her guttered and died that night. She stopped bringing him flowers. She stopped wearing the colors he liked. She stopped waiting by the window when his horse approached. The love she had offered so freely she now folded away, like a delicate garment stored in darkness, never to be worn again. In the months that followed, Evelina quietly transformed her life. She turned her attention outward, to the estate that had become her gilded cage. Thornfield Hall was vast, but its tenant farms had fallen into gentle neglect under a duke who cared more for his London clubs than his lands. Evelina began visiting the village with only her maid. She listened to the farmers' worries, wrote letters to distant physicians for advice on a sickness that plagued the livestock, and used her small personal allowance to purchase seeds for the cottage gardens. She discovered a talent for herbal remedies, learned from an old midwife in the village, and soon the tenants began to seek her out for salves and tinctures. They called her the Quiet Duchess with affection. She smiled more among them than she ever had inside Thornfield's cold walls. At home, she became a shadow. She still performed her duties at formal dinners, seated at the far end of the table, but she no longer attempted to draw her husband's attention. She answered in soft monosyllables, excused herself early, and spent her evenings in the small sitting room she had claimed for herself, reading or writing letters to her sister. Alexander, absorbed in his own world, noticed only that she had become less troublesome. He did not see the light fading from her eyes. He did not realize that a woman who stops hopping is a woman who is already halfway gone. The first real shift came on an afternoon in early summer, nearly a year after that ballroom humiliation. Evelina was in the greenhouse, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins, repotting seedlings with the head gardener. The sun streamed through the glass, warming the earthy air, and she laughed at something the old man said. It was a sound Alexander had not heard in an age. He had returned from London a day early and was crossing the lawn when the laughter drifted toward him, light and genuine. He stopped. Through the glass he saw his wife, dirt smudged on her cheek, her face open and unguarded. She looked like a different woman from the pale, silent figure who haunted his dining room. Something tightened in his chest, an unfamiliar ache. He walked away without announcing himself, unsettled. A few weeks later, Lord Julian Ashford arrived in the county. He was the new Viscount from the neighboring estate, a warm-eyed man with an easy laugh and a reputation for kindness. He met Evelina at a village fair where she was helping a child who had scraped his knee. Julian dismounted, offered his handkerchief, and struck up a conversation that lasted nearly an hour. He had no airs, no coldness. He treated her as though she were fascinating. After that first meeting, he began to call at Thornfield with cheerful regularity, always with a book he thought she might enjoy, or a question about estate management that he claimed only she could answer. Evelina found herself looking forward to his visits in a way she had long forgotten. Alexander noticed. He noticed the way Julian's face lit up when Evelina entered the room. He noticed the bouquet of wildflowers that appeared on the hall table, gathered not by her husband but by a neighbor. He noticed his wife's soft smile when she spoke of Julian's newest venture in crop rotation. Jealousy crept into Alexander's chest like a slow poison, unrecognized at first, then undeniable. One evening he stood by the window of his study and watched Julian help Evelina down from her mare, his hands lingering at her waist a moment too long. Alexander's jaw tightened until it ached. She was his wife. She belonged here at Thornfield. The thought shocked him with its ferocity. When had he last thought of her as his? When had he last thought of her at all? He began to watch her, not with the distant dismissal of before, but with a sharp, hungry attention. He noticed the way the servants' faces softened when she spoke to them. He noticed how the tenants' children brought her little offerings of berries and woven grasses. He noticed that she never complained, never demanded, never asked for anything. And he noticed, with a chill that reached deep into his marrow, that she never looked at him anymore. Her gaze would slide past him as if he were just another piece of furniture. The woman who had once hung on his every word now treated him with the same calm courtesy she might offer a stranger on a train. Desperation began to build, though he refused to name it. He started to seek her out, making clumsy attempts at conversation. He commented on the weather, asked about the garden, even complimented a gown she wore to a small dinner party. Each time, she responded politely, briefly, and then found an excuse to leave. He felt the sting of her indifference like a lash. He, the Duke of Thornfield, who had never had to strive for anyone's favor, was being quietly, gently, devastatingly dismissed by his own wife. The moment of truth arrived on a rain-lashed night in late autumn. Alexander could not sleep. The house groaned under the storm, and his thoughts churned with images of Evelina laughing with Julian in the greenhouse, her face bright with a joy she never gave him. On impulse, he went to her sitting room, telling himself he would just check that the windows were secure. The room smelled of lavender and old books. A fire had burned low in the grate. On her small writing desk, a single candle still flickered, illuminating a stack of papers. He knew he should not look. He looked anyway. The papers were letters, written in her graceful hand. They were addressed to her sister Margaret, but none had ever been sent. He unfolded the top one, dated nearly 2 years ago. The words blurred, then sharpened with terrible clarity. My dearest Margaret, I cannot send this letter, for if anyone ever read it, the truth would destroy more than just my foolish heart. But I must write it somewhere, or I will go mad. You asked me once why I agreed to marry the Duke of Thornfield so suddenly. I told you it was to save Papa from ruin, and that was true. But there is a deeper truth I have kept even from you. The debts that ruined our family were not Papa's fault alone. They were orchestrated by the late Duke of Thornfield, Alexander's father. I found the documents in Papa's study before the marriage was arranged. The old Duke created a fraudulent investment scheme, luring Papa and several other gentlemen into ruin, all to enrich himself. He died before the truth came to light. Alexander knows nothing of his father's crime. If the scandal were revealed, Thornfield's reputation would be destroyed, and Alexander, who values honor above all things, would be crushed. I could not let that happen. So when the solicitor came with the marriage offer, an offer Alexander himself did not truly want, I suspect, I saw a way to save Papa, to protect our family from disgrace, and to shield Alexander from ever learning what a villain his own father was. I thought perhaps, in time, he might grow to care for me. I was a fool. I love him, Margaret. I have loved him since the first moment I saw him standing in the great hall, so cold and so wounded by a world I did not yet understand. But he will never love me back. He believes I trapped him. He believes I am a burden. I overheard him say so to his friend. I think something inside me died that night. I have stopped hopping. I will do my duty. I will be a good duchess to his people, and I will never let him know the truth. He must never learn what his father did. It would break him. So I will bear his coldness, and I will bear my silence, and I will learn to let him go. Yours in secret, Evie. The letter trembled in Alexander's hands. He read it again, then a third time. Each word was a blade twisted into his chest. His father, the man whose portrait hung in the great hall, whose memory Alexander had spent his life trying to honor, had been a swindler who destroyed innocent families. And Evelina, the woman he had treated with such contempt, had known all along. She had married him not to trap him, but to save him from that devastating truth. She had absorbed his cruelty, his neglect, his public humiliations, all while carrying a secret that could have set her free. She had loved him. She had loved him, and he had shattered her hope with his own careless words. He sank into her chair, the letter still clutched in his hand. Guilt rose like a flood, drowning every arrogant assumption he had ever made. He remembered her early gentleness, the flowers, the nervous smiles, the way she had once looked at him as though he were the sun. He remembered his own coldness, his calculated indifference, the way he had dismissed her existence to his friend. He had called her a burden. He had left her standing alone in ballrooms while he danced with other women. He had never once asked her about her dreams, her fears, her heart. He had been a blind, arrogant fool, and now she was slipping away, finding solace in another man's kindness because he, her husband, had given her nothing but ice. Fear of loss seized him with a physical force. He thought of Julian Ashford's warm gaze, and a possessive, desperate terror clawed at his throat. He could not lose her. Not now. Not when he finally understood. He had to tell her. He had to beg her forgiveness, even if she never granted it. He found her the next morning in the greenhouse. She was alone, trimming dead leaves from a climbing rose, her fingers gentle and sure. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and bright. She did not hear him approach until he spoke her name. She turned, and for the first time in years, Alexander truly looked into her eyes. What he saw there was not anger, not bitterness, but a quiet, settled distance. It terrified him more than any fury could have. "Evelina," he said, his voice rough, "I found the letter." Her hand stilled. A flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed her face before she composed herself. "Which letter?" "The one you never sent to your sister. I know what my father did. I know why you married me." He stepped closer, his heart pounding. "I know you did it to protect me. And I know what you overheard me say to Sterling. I know I broke your heart." She set down the small pruning shears and wiped her hands on her apron, her movements unhurried. When she looked up again, her expression was calm, but her voice held a tremor she could not entirely hide. "It does not matter now, Alexander. The past is past. You do not need to concern yourself." "It matters," he said, his voice cracking. "It matters because I have wronged you beyond measure, because I was too proud and too blind to see the truth. You gave up everything, your reputation, your happiness, your hope, to save me from a scandal I did not even know existed, and I repaid you with years of silence and shame." He reached out as if to take her hand, then stopped, afraid of her rejection. "I am so sorry. I know those words are too small, but they are all I have. I am sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her gaze, a crack in the armor she had so carefully built, but she did not step toward him. "I believed I could love you enough for both of us," she said quietly. "I was wrong. Love cannot survive on silence. You made me invisible, and eventually I learned to be content with shadows. You cannot undo those years with a single apology." "I know," he said, his voice thick with anguish. "But I will spend the rest of my life trying. I will rebuild every garden, mend every fence, honor every tenant you have cared for. I will shout my gratitude from the rooftops if you wish it. Just," he drew a shuddering breath, "please do not leave me. Please do not let another man have the happiness I was too stupid to claim." A single tear slid down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, as if ashamed. "You are too late," she whispered. "I already let you go. I had to, or I would have drowned." The word struck him like a physical blow. "Is there nothing left?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Not even a memory of love?" She was silent. Outside, a bird began to sing, a bright thread of sound in the quiet. Finally she spoke. "I do not know. There is something perhaps, but it is buried very deep, and it is very tired. You will need to be patient, Alexander, more patient than you have ever been." It was not a promise. It was not forgiveness. But it was a door left ajar. Alexander clung to it like a drowning man to driftwood. In the weeks that followed, the Duke of Thornfield became a different man. He did not make grand gestures. He understood that she would mistrust them. Instead, he learned to be present. He visited the tenants with her, standing quietly at the back while she dispensed her remedies and advice, and when the farmers thanked her, he echoed their gratitude. He ordered the old, neglected gardens restored, not with impersonal workers, but with his own hands whenever time allowed, planting the climbing roses she loved. He made a public apology at a small dinner with close friends and family, acknowledging his coldness and her grace, watching color rise in her cheeks as the guests looked at her with new respect. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance between them began to shrink. She did not run to him, but she stopped avoiding him. She accepted his company on walks through the estate. She let him bring her tea in the greenhouse. One evening, she found a new writing desk in her sitting room, carved with a pattern of ivy she had once admired in a shop window years ago. She traced the leaves with her fingertips and felt the ghost of her old hope stir. The moment of true healing came on a crisp winter evening 6 months after his confession. Snow had fallen softly all day, blanketing Thornfield in silence. Alexander found Evelina in the library, reading by the fire. He sat beside her, close but not too close, and simply said, "I thought I understood duty, but you taught me what honor really means. You taught me what strength looks like. And I think I have loved you for a long time, only I was too afraid to name it. I am not afraid anymore." She closed her book. The firelight played over her features, catching the faint silver that had appeared at her temples. She looked at him, and this time there was no armor in her eyes. "I was angry," she said, "and I was broken, but I never stopped hoping that one day you would see me. I buried that hope so deep I thought it was dead. It was not." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "I will spend every day proving that your hope was not in vain," he said. "I love you, Evelina. I love you too late, but I love you with everything I am." A sob caught in her throat, but it was not a sound of pain. It was release, the last chain falling away. "Then I will try," she whispered. "I will try to let you in again." That spring, the gardens bloomed more brilliantly than anyone at Thornfield could remember. Roses climbed the old stone walls, and lavender bordered every path. And on a bench beneath an arch of white blossoms, the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield sat together, her head resting against his shoulder, their hands intertwined. They did not speak of the past. They had already given it its due. Instead, they spoke of the future, small and quiet plans, a shared existence built not on grand passion, but on a steady, enduring tenderness that had been hard-won and deeply cherished. The villagers still called her the quiet Duchess, but they saw now how the Duke looked at her, as if she were the very heart of his world. And when she laughed, which she did more often, he would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. He never again looked through her. He had learned, at the last possible moment, what it meant to truly see. And she, who had once loved him quietly and let him go, discovered that some loves do not end when hope dies. Some loves wait, patient and stubborn, until the heart is ready to beat again. Theirs was not a fairy tale. It was something deeper, a story of loss, of silence, of painful growth, and finally of two people who chose to heal together. It was, in the end, enough. It was everything.